Another English language A-level video with me, Paul, subject leader for English at QE Darlington, and this one is a second video which is about pragmatics. In the first one we introduced the concept of pragmatics and we talked about implicature and inference. We examined notions of schema, schematic knowledge, and we rounded it off with Grice's conversational maxims. And this little video is about face, and it's also about deixis. So let's get into the idea of face. Face is bound up with the notion of politeness, and politeness, if we have to define it, is this idea of being mindful of others' personal or face needs. Okay, so this is important in terms of pragmatics, because pragmatics is about how we interact socially with others. Along comes a sociologist called Goffman, who did a lot of work way back in the 1950s on what he called positive and negative face needs. And he reckons that all human beings have these. Positive face is the need to feel appreciated and valued. So if I use very complimentary language towards you, what a wonderful shirt you're wearing, you have fantastic taste, then obviously that's positive face. I'm attending to your positive face needs. Negative face, on the other hand, is the desire to feel independent and not imposed upon. Okay, so when you're attending to somebody's negative face needs, you're often using language in an ultra polite, sometimes indirect way, in order to not to be too direct with them. Okay, and sometimes we can do these things called face-threatening acts. So that's a speech act that has the potential to damage someone's self-esteem, either in terms of positive or negative face. Okay, so let's look at some examples of these sorts of things. Imagine that you're on a train, you're next to somebody who is playing their music too loud, and it's beginning to annoy you. Now, what are your possible responses? Well, you could do a direct request. Turn that music down, like that. Now, the only problem with that in public situations is that if you do a direct request like that, that might be perceived as a face-threatening act, in which case you might get into some kind of confrontation. So quite often we don't do that. We don't do direct requests. And quite often we do kind of indirect requests, like saying something like, this is a great book I'm reading, and hoping through implicature that the other person will infer your implied meanings. A positive politeness strategy might mean saying something like, wow, excuse me, that's a great album, isn't it? And engaging the person with a conversation. And through that positive conversation, trying to get through to them the idea that they've played their music too loud. On the other hand, a negative politeness strategy might be to say something like, look, I'm really sorry to ask you this, but can you just turn down the music just a little? Okay, so all those sort of polite, indirect bits in that last phrase, those are negative politeness strategies. Okay, so when we do negative politeness, we try to mitigate the imposition on others, and we do it in lots of different ways. Quite often we hedge. Could you perhaps close the window? So we've got these kind of non-verbal fillers here, which kind of try and hedge the issue. We've also got a hedging adverb here, perhaps. The second way that we do it is by being pessimistic. I don't suppose you could possibly close the window. So phrasing it in a pessimistic way like that kind of gives the option to the other person to perhaps refuse your request. Another way of doing negative politeness is to indicate deference. Excuse me, sir, would you mind if I ask you to close the window? So we've got the politeness strategy at the beginning there, excuse me, and then we've got the honorific, sir, as well. So that's indicating deference, that somehow you are a kind of subservient social position to the other person that you're speaking to. We have apologizing. I'm terribly sorry to put you out, but could you close the window? And then finally, we've got this notion of impersonalization. So organizations do this all the time. The management requires all windows to be closed. Okay, so it kind of takes the personal element out of the request completely. So these are all great examples of negative politeness strategies, and they're pragmatic features that are well worth pointing out when you're looking at transcripts of conversations. It's interesting to analyse the pragmatics that we've studied so far in situation comedies. And if you were in my class now, I'd be playing you the first 5 minutes of Fawlty Towers, Britain's favourite situation comedy. It was voted in many polls as being the best ever situation comedy of the 20th century. So what you'd be doing is analysing how the pragmatics in this comedy creates meanings and representations. Remember, I always put that phrase in meanings and representations because in your paper 1, section A, the question is always analyse how the language in such and such a text creates meanings and representations. So here you'd be looking at what's going on with implied and inferred meanings, i.e. what is being said between the lines. To what extent does the audience or the participants, are they drawing upon schematic knowledge? Have we got characters flouting the Grice's conversational maxims? And do we have instances of face, i.e. positive or negative politeness strategies, or even face-threatening acts? Okay, now I would play you that. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to show you the first lines of this. So this is set in a hotel. We've got a man and wife who are running the hotel. They're both middle-aged. Sybil is speaking on the telephone to one of her friends, and Basil is in the office at the back getting increasingly annoyed by her volubility. I know, it all started with that electrician, didn't it? Real live YA was. Only 1 watt, but plenty of volts, as they say. Anything in trousers, yes, or out of them preferably. Yeah. No, just lighting up. Go on. I know. I heard that with her mother in the same room. No, 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 no. Of course I won't. Go on. Basil. Yes, dear. Oh, no. Who saw that? Basil. Yes, dear. Could you come and attend to a gentleman out here? Okay, so here in these opening lines, what have we got here in terms of pragmatics, which is kind of adding to the meanings and representations? Well, first of all, we've got Sybil at the front here on the front desk, and her long conversation. Remember, she's on duty in the hotel, but what she's doing is she's flouting Grice's maxims of quantity, because she's speaking rather a lot, and manner, because she doesn't sound very professional. So she's speaking at great length, and she's speaking quite an inappropriate way in the presence of a guest. Okay. She says real live wire. So this is a good example of an idiomatic expression, and it's an implied meaning. It implies the electrician's over an energetic personality. And there are kind of implied meanings as well with the phrase anything in trousers, which implies that Sybil's friend is oversexed. So we've got implied meanings that the audience is going to infer. We've got dear here being used by Basil. Yes, dear. Yes, dear. So this term of address, dear, is a politeness strategy. And so you could say it's attending to Sybil's face needs. But what's funny actually here is that you've got this humour between the contrast between Basil's polite language and his unstated irritation at his wife's behaviour. Okay, and what else have we got? So you've got here, could you come and attend to a gentleman out here? So this is a politeness strategy. So what you've got here is actually an imperative. Sybil is telling Basil what to do, but it's phrased as a kind of interrogative. And she uses the honorific term, gentleman, so she's using positive face. And that contrasts humorously with Sybil's colloquial gossip with her friend. So there's plenty to pick up there. The humour is created through a lot of these pragmatic devices. So what I'd say to you is have a look at the rest of the script, which is in the booklet on pages 84 to 88, and in the same way try and apply as much pragmatic ideas as you possibly can. Ultimately, then, you'd be producing this essay. So analyse how the Fawlty Towers script, or at least the beginning of it, uses language to create pragmatic meanings and representations. And well, I've given you some topic sentences. Remember, if you're constructing an essay, you've got to plan it out beforehand so that you've got discourse markers at the beginning so that your paragraphs are well shaped. So here are 3 example discourse markers. Much of the humour derives from characters flouting Grice's conversational maxims. So you'll continue on applying Grice in the rest of that paragraph with some really good examples. A second discourse marker would be some of the comedy arises from implied meanings which the audience are expected to infer. So the focus in this paragraph is about implicature and inference. And then a third discourse marker could be humour is also created through the way characters respond to others' face needs. And so this is where you could talk about positive and negative face and face-threatening acts. Okay, so that's useful for you. Remember, in your paper 1 section A, the meanings and representations, it could well be that you get a transcript to analyse, and also your language investigation. When you eventually come on to do that, many of you will be looking at scripts. Okay, so that's an important element of pragmatics. We'll now move on to deixis. So deixis means context-dependent language. It's often a feature of speech, but it can be in other kinds of texts as well. We have different forms of deixis. These are explained in the textbook on page 49. We have personal deixis. So this is where you refer to specific names or you refer to people or things with personal pronouns. So that's called personal deixis. We have spatial deixis, where these are words like here and there, so adverbs of place that show where something is. This and that, these are demonstratives, these show location, those are spatial deictical utterances. And you've also got orientational words such as left and right. Obviously, you have to be there in that situation to understand where that being referred to. And then you've got deictical verbs such as come and go. A kind of subcategory of all of these spatial deictic utterances are these two as proximal and distal. Again, this is all explained on page 49 in the textbook. Proximal deixis refers to concepts, events, or people close to the speaker. So this, for example, would be an example of proximal deixis, whereas distal deixis refers to concepts, events, or people at a distance from the speaker. So that would be an example of a distal deictical utterance. So far we've talked about personal deixis, spatial deixis, and then you've got temporal deixis, meaning to do with time. So adverbs of time, such as yesterday and tomorrow, they are temporal deictical utterances. Okay, so this is how it works in practice. You've got an utterance like this. She put that there yesterday. So she is an example of personal deixis because you have to be there in that conversation in order to know who that third person singular subject female pronoun is actually referring to. We have some temporal deixis with this adverbial of time yesterday. Okay, you have to be there on that particular day to know when yesterday actually was. And then we've got that there. So we've got some spatial deixis. So there, the adverb is spatial deixis, and that, which is distal. So spatial distal deixis. So these are useful terms to apply when you're looking at transcripts. Here's an example of this in practice. So this is on page 50 in your textbook. It's taken from an internet tour guide to Paris. And what you have to do is identify all the deictical references used in the text. This is just the beginning of it, actually, but it's much longer in the text on page 50. You say goodbye to Notre Dame and walk towards Rue de la Cite. Turn right, then left, and you'll arrive at Boulevard du Paris. There's so many things to see here. You might think of visiting La Sainte-Chapelle, but you only have a day, remember? Okay, so it starts off with the second person pronoun there, which is a piece of personal deixis, because obviously you have to be the person who is taking this guide in Paris for this to work as a text. And so you say goodbye to Notre Dame and walk towards Rue de la Cité. So this is suggesting that spatially you are in a particular place of Paris for this to make sense. And so you've got these orientation words here, right and left, which are also deictical. And you'll arrive at Boulevard du Paris. Okay, so your job would be to deconstruct all the deictical utterances there, try and work out whether they are personal, spatial, or temporal, and also distal and proximal if relevant. And a sort of final thing to do on that as an extension task would be for you to be writing an amusing transcript, which is full of these examples of personal, spatial, and temporal deixis. So imagine that you are taking your cousin on a guided tour of your hometown. And so you could write a page-long, amusing transcript of a guide to wherever it may be, Stockton, Bishop Auckland, Northallerton, Darlow. And then once you've done that, then write a short accompanying commentary on how the deixis, the deictical utterances, are linking to the meanings. Okay, so that's the end of this video. We've talked about face, negative, positive politeness, Goffman's ideas on that, and we've done quite a lot about deixis as well. In our next video, we're going to be looking at the wonderful world of discourse. So hope to see you then.